Good morning. We welcome you to the Wednesday, February the 12th meeting of the Board of Trustees for the Utah Transit Authority, and would invite you to stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll begin with our Safety First Minute, and we welcome Sheldon Shaw with us.
Good morning, Chair, Trustees. Appreciate the opportunity, as always. This week's safety message was a short one. Safety is everyone's responsibility. Do the right or safe things because it's right, not because someone is looking. And that is in keeping with we're all responsible for our own safety. Our motto is everyone home safe every day in the safety department, and so everybody's help is needed to do that. And if I could be so bold to mention one other thing, today the great state of Utah is celebrating 150th anniversary since the women's right to vote was passed. That happened on February 12th, 1870. And there's an event going on at the state capitol right now with the governor and a couple thousand students from across the state, and so it's a great thing for our state. So appreciate the opportunity.
That was well noted. Thank you, Sheldon, and it is a significant day, so we thank you for acknowledging that. We'll next turn to public comments, and Bob, any public
We did receive one online that's been provided to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And next we'll move to our consent agenda, which includes approval of some minutes from January 29th.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the January 29th board minutes.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. We'll next go to our agency report, and we'll turn to Carolyn Gannett, our Executive Director. Good morning.
Good morning. Just a quick update on service choices. The public, the local community leaders, UTA's advisory council members, and UTA's board of trustees have asked UTA's planning staff to explore various scenarios that would dedicate more of a ridership-focused bus service as opposed to more coverage-based service. And as you see, there's been quite a few sort of meetings or items on this before. So with the assistance of Jarrett Walker and Associates, UTA staff is working on developing a draft bus network plan that reflects his ridership-focused objective. We've had a number of workshops internally. We anticipate sharing the proposed network at the May local advisory council meeting and then collecting public input on that draft plan over the summer. Our goal is to have the final bus network plan present for adoption in the August-September 2020 timeframe, so this August or September. So that's an update on service choices. Also, just wanted, I'm going to call Eddie forward and Bruce, Dave, I'm not sure, Cheryl coming, they're all coming. We just want to give a little bit of update on, we know there were a lot of delays on the rail service last week with the snow. And so we're just going to give some updates. Eddie's going to go through some of the things that were occurring and some of the things that we actually have in place to mitigate and also as going forward.
Thank you. As you're aware, operations struggled significantly last week on Front Runner and Track specifically. As a result, our customers did experience extensive delays. From Saturday, February 1st to Thursday, February 6th, the operation team dealt with a broken water main, cold temperatures, heavy snowfall, a power surge, crossing protection issues, and numerous non-UTA related car accidents. All of these incidents resulted in delays for us. It was very tough. I attended a meeting yesterday afternoon with the operations team to review each delay. The team discussed each issue, determined what the root cause was, and went to work on developing an action plan. Some of our major focus areas for improvement are switch heaters, switch covers, distribution of our workforce, snow-related mechanical failures, and our customer communication. I can tell you that the UTA team is 100% committed to improving in these areas and to ensure that we mitigate weather-related delays in the future and improve our communication with our customers. Before I open it up for questions, I would like to take a moment to commend all of our employees. Our employees worked extremely hard in difficult conditions last week to keep the system moving. Our rail system struggled significantly, but it definitely wasn't from a lack of employee effort. And so with that, I'd love to answer any of your questions.
Well, let me just start and acknowledge thank you for reviewing all those issues. And You know, I always think it's about going forward. I mean, learning from what took place. And I mean, I was just watching the traffic report this morning, and one car accident or somewhere on I-15 has delayed traffic 50 minutes, and you know, you don't control those kinds of things. And so our corridor has as much, probably fewer issues than the I-15 corridor does, because that's not an uncommon occurrence on a week-to-week basis. So I think I feel good about our overall thing. I would love to hear as you some thoughts about the kinds of things that you think improve reliability. Obviously, you can't control the unknowns, but is there a common theme in some of the stuff that we'd want to look at going forward, and do we need to look at resources so that that can be accomplished?
So one of the things, I mean, we experienced some weather-related challenges last winter. The thing that made this year a little more difficult and a little more pronounced, if you will, was PTC being activated on the south end. And so, you know, on Thursday when we had the Lehigh Crossing issue, one of the issues that was there is that lots of salt gets dumped, you know, as the snowplow comes over and they plow. They pick up their plow when they go over the tracks, but they continue to dump salt. The salt acts as a conductor and makes the system think that a train is there. And so the arms are down with PTC in full activation, slows the train down. And then, of course, as you know, with our single track system, everything gets delayed and one train has to wait on the other. We also had several switch-related issues. I will tell you, we have 189 switches throughout our system, and probably about 10 or 12 of them caused us some significant problems. And so we will be looking at a plan. That's one of the action plans that we'll be flushing out, is developing a plan to replace and upgrade several of our switches in the area. And switch covers is another big one. We had installed 6 switch covers over the last summer. Those were in the areas that we really experienced problems last year, and we didn't see any problems where we had switch covers. So we installed 6. We had 7 more that arrived last week that will be getting installed. And then we would look at probably another 35 to complete Front Runner and have switch covers on each of those. And then, of course, there's a few that we can do on tracks. On tracks, a lot of embedded track in downtown. Obviously can't put switch covers on those, but everywhere we have ballast track, we could install switch covers. So we'll be looking at that and putting together a plan.
And I almost feel guilty, not really guilty, but in my prior role, we really pushed for embedded track. Does embedded versus ballasted track, is there a significant difference in how they perform in that kind of weather? And did I inflict a lot of pain on you 20 years ago?
You know, they function a little bit differently. In ballasted track, we use hot air to clear the switches. In embedded track, it's like a cow rod or just a rod that you put on the side of the rail that heats up the rail. So they are significantly different. You have different issues with the cow rod and the power and that kind of stuff, but it is a little different system.
Do you have a performance difference? I mean, does one perform better than the other?
We've had luck with the hot air blowers. The cow rods seem to be a little bit touchy. They'll get so hot that they burn themselves out, and we're replacing a lot of them.
One of the issues that we did identify yesterday that was kind of surprising to me is we have on the switch heaters, we have 2 sensors, one that's up high and one that's down low. And when we experience blowing snow, a lot of times, and this happened in several occasions for us, there wasn't anything wrong with the switch heater, but the blowing snow drifted and created somewhat of a roof over the top. And so when the snow was coming down, the sensor did not sense the snow. And so when our MOW employees finally got there, they could simply take a handful of snow, dump it on the sensor, and it fired up. And so that's a challenge that we're really going to have to look at, because obviously snow is going to drift in different ways at different times.
Beth, you have some questions?
I just had a question, and I don't know how we can coordinate this, but I'm wondering if there's an opportunity for us to look at maybe more of a communication side of things and see if there's a way to I mean, I recognize that there are probably some of our customers who are already on there. There wasn't much they could do, but if there is an opportunity to maybe push out notifications or something else, I'm thinking that if you write it, you're probably on Twitter, You probably are at least have some social media that gets an alert, but maybe there's another opportunity to really refine that, or at least look at a different approach. That's just kind of what I wanted
Right,
to.
and I'm going to let Bruce speak to that a little bit. Obviously, we want to improve the communication. That was a big piece of it. Bruce and I have talked a little bit about, making announcements on the train with the operators and the train hosts for the people that are already on there, and then also making announcements on the platforms. But I'll turn that over to Bruce.
You bet. So in addition to the meeting that Eddie mentioned where we looked at the root cause of every delay, yesterday we also had a meeting focused on the communication side of the issue. And what we really identified is that our communication system got overwhelmed. We didn't have enough people to get the information out to where it needed to get during some of the major delays. So we've identified some opportunities and ways that we can activate more of our employees to be part of that communication effort during delays. We used to have a program that we called Go Teams that we'd send out. And what happened is we'd send folks out to platforms, and then they're standing on the platform with the UTA vest on, and they have no more information than what the customers on the platform had. And so it ended up creating more frustration than benefit. Since that time, there are new communication mechanisms that we could deploy to help push information to those folks. And so we're going to revitalize or resurrect that program that we had to scrap because the technology wasn't there to support it. But now we believe the technology can help support that kind of an effort to have more ambassadors of UTA out in the system. We had a meeting Tuesday morning with the senior leadership team at UTA and asked the question to the group. This included, both the managers that are responsible for operation, but also all of the administrative directors and senior managers. Asked the question, in a major event, whether it's weather or other kinds of event related, how many of you have people that could help in those situations to improve communication and improve response and those kinds of things? And every person raised their hand. And so there's a resource there that we haven't tapped into yet, that we're now going to create a list of duties that we can call people from this building or people as they're at their homes and say, hey, can you report to South Jordan Station this morning instead of coming into work, and spend time out there with our customers, and we'll prepare them so that they have specific things that they can do. So I'm really excited about opportunities that we've identified to really mobilize more of our UTA resources to help.
So I did talk to Eddie a little bit about this because ambassador type programs do work really well. I came from one that had one and a couple other agencies I worked with. This one would be maybe specific to emergencies or weather type and guessing so that people understand where they're going to be working at. We're stretching operations as far as it can go, and there's other people within the agency that can support. So I think that's one of the areas that we're really going to start to look at is create that, and that allows others who want to volunteer, which many people would offer to do, to go and help on those days to go out. And so to create those programs will be very useful going forward.
Yeah. Any other questions? Ken, did you have one?
Well, not questions, just comments. I know that I was involved in some pretty serious delays last week myself because I take front runner. And I did see, however, that the operators and the train hosts were as accommodating as they could be. They were making announcements. They were inviting those that were waiting for a southbound, because I was northbound, a southbound train to get on the northbound train that had to wait and warm up. And there was some of that coordination. And I think that was very well done. I like the idea of mobilizing those of us in the administrative side to help out. I mean, I get on an American Fork every day, and I just get on and ride north. If I needed to stay there for a while and coordinate some things, and there's several of us that get on, several that work here, get on an American Fork. And so we could distribute that resource across Utah County and help out in that way. I like that idea very much. I think that's a really interesting and effective way to do it.
We'll put you on the American Fork Go team. So
I'm
go
I'm
north.
ready. I'm ready for that because I'm right there.
So I had the same experience. The train that I was on last week, the engineer and train hosts were making announcements that kept the customers informed. That's not as consistent on every train as we want it to be. And so this week we've really been out communicating with every one of our employees to talk about how much of a difference it makes for the customer just knowing what's happening. When there's silence, they assume the worst, and that's the natural reaction that everyone has. Is if we don't know what the problem is, we assume things are worse than they are, and sometimes maybe we may not. Some of the incidents last week's were worse than we've ever seen in our system before, and so no one expects those kinds of things to happen. But that's something that we were really focusing on, is helping our employees really understand the importance of communication through events to help reduce the anxiety on the train.
Well, and candidly, I would say that when you have people who understand what is going on, as you're saying, it is a lot easier for them to go, okay, I'll just call my office, or I'll just do this. Whereas they can actually help us in a way, right? They can forward that communication to others. And so I am a huge proponent of the communication strategy. So anything that you guys are looking to do, I'm happy to do whatever I can to help in any way. So thank you for that.
Yeah, one thing I will say is, I know that we did struggle a little bit getting information out, well, actually a lot. But again, when I commend employees, our communications folks did an awesome job they worked extremely hard of trying to communicate the information. Obviously, we struggled a little bit. Absolutely wasn't from a lack of effort from that group. So we really appreciate what they did for us and their help.
Can I just say one more thing? One of the things that we are the best at is in crises, and it's interesting to me how everyone comes together and brings their resources. And so I listened to everyone yesterday talk about, we have these gives. For me, in the paratransit world, most people don't travel. And so we have operators sitting around. And so I listened to the paratransit folks say, we've got operators to give. And they could be warming huts. We could go to track stations and be warming huts. And so that's the conversation that we get to have in these crises is, how do we give to the community and serve? And so, unfortunately, these are lessons learned, but we've got great people working on this.
Well, I will say, despite the delays and the challenges, that at least safety took the foremost of that, and nobody was injured because of it. And, I'm confident in the scope of their life. Those 2 hours will somehow come back to them, and they'll regain that. And especially as we learn lessons and find ways to improve, I hope you'll consider us part of that solution and dialogue and finding the sort of, the responsible way to solve some of these issues, so that I think to myself how blessed we are to have the weather we did. I mean, at the end of the day, in July and August, we need the moisture, and so it's at some point we're going to have some snow here, and so but being prepared in how to handle it. And the last thing I would say is I'm from Rose Park, so we're prepared to go anywhere. So just let us know. We're happy to do that. So anyway, any other questions though? Okay. Thank you very much for the report. Carolyn, did you have anything else you'd like to?
No, I just think that, the staff has really spent some time going over all the issues. Granted, not all of them were in our control, which sort of exacerbated the situation. But I think to make this more of an agency-wide effort in making some determinations. Now, you will see us come back and potentially we will be looking for funding for more covers, for the switch covers and those types of things going forward. So there's capital improvements that can happen, but it's also getting organized around the communications as well as the ability to potentially not just communicate, but also make some changes to help the system move.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you. With that, we'll move forward, and I know that I don't think Shul's here yet. I know he had some on the Hill obligations, so we'll come back to him if he's able to join us at that point. So then we'll go to our financial report with Bob Biles.
Thank you. What we'll be doing today is going over preliminary December reports. We're still in the process of closing out 2019, but we want to make sure that you have as early an indication of how we think things have gone for the year. So take a look at our dashboard here. The good news is if you look to the right side, every one of those are green. So our sales, if you look down in that bottom chart, we've been having that red line, the 6-month line, below our 12-month line for some time, but in the last 2 months it's shot above. So that's good news as we look ahead. The 6-month line is almost 7% growth over the prior same 6-month period. And the 12-month, that brought it up almost a full percentage point this last month to almost 5%, which is our long-term average. So the sales tax number, we'll have the final numbers in a couple of weeks when we get the February distribution. We're hearing good news there. We'll see how good that news is, if it really shows up or not. Fair revenue, we landed almost exactly on top of what we budgeted for the year. So that was good. That was a bit of a challenge goal, actually, for our team. So kudos to Monica and others who worked so hard on fair revenue. Operating expense, right now we're about $10 million to the good. I would expect that to decline just a little bit as we're closing out the books and some final expenses show up. Head to diesel price. We ended up the year at $2.10 average. We budgeted $2.50. Each dime is worth about $700,000, so that's about $2.8 million of that $10 million savings. It's just diesel prices. And then ridership, even though it's yellow there, we actually ended up the year about 22,000 more riders than we had in 2018. So pretty much good news all along on this particular dashboard. Questions before we move on?
Well, just a comment, the ridership, where we're basically flat, is kind of going against the norm across the country, where we see declines almost every other place, and to hold steady like we have indicates that we're doing something right.
Yeah, you know, you look at our staff and all the efforts that are being made, and we're making good choices.
I will just throw out there, for whatever it's worth, that those fuel savings will be helpful in offsetting some of the costs that we just discussed, and you know, so that's a nice year-end blessing. So.
Yeah, so one of the things I do at the end of the fiscal years, you know, we estimate what our cash carryover will be, and so we do some calculations to see if we ended up with the cash carryover that we expected or not. So we have to wait till the books are closed. We have to get through what the capital projects carryovers will be, because we estimated a certain amount of carryover into the 2020 budget from capital. You'll see it on the budget amendment today. We're carrying over some planning dollars from the 2019 budget into 2020. So I try to take all that into account, as well as receivables and payables, to see, are we on track from a cash perspective. So more work to do there.
Sorry to interrupt. I had a question. It was kind of along the lines of fuel, but I'm just curious if part of our strategy when we look at this, and I'm assuming that it would be, is do we look at how fuel is going to, what's anticipated in the coming year in terms of how do we balance our budgeted amount versus what we anticipate, I guess is my...
Sure. So we use the EIA projections when we do the budget, and look at that, take into account the Rocky Mountain pricing, and then take out the average taxes, because it includes taxes. We take out the average taxes to arrive at a number. And so I believe we continued this year at 250 again. January was, I believe, 190 for diesel. So we're starting the year out well. But we also have some issues as we get into talking about the expenses that we'll have to look at, specifically wages and benefits. So here's sales tax. Utah County is leading the increases, has been for quite a while. But it's interesting. It's unusual to see it almost this flat. Almost everyone's in that 4 to 5% range. And these numbers were all about 1% lower when we talked last month. So we had a really good November. We're to the expense side. This is just looking at it by mode on the, it's pretty much the same things I've been reporting for several months on the administrative side. Risk management, 2.2 million of that. A lot of that was the recoveries that we were able to achieve. It was 1.2 million of that. And then Dave Pitcher's good work on the insurance and keeping our insurance costs low. Also includes IT, 1.7 million, legal, 800,000 savings, the executive director, 400,000, and the board, 400,000, all contributed to that first big number. As far as operations support, asset management's 1.1 million of that savings, and then the COO office is another 400,000. Paratransit, we had some pluses and minuses. Mobility management was favorable, 800,000. Operations were unfavorable by about 800,000. And the maintenance group really is the difference, the $400,000 savings. Maintenance away, mainly propulsion power. It's offset a little bit by contributions and capital. We were over budget just a little bit. When we get into light rail, commuter rail, and bus, that's where we start seeing some of the wages issues, where we've been over on wages a little bit, but we had savings in other areas to offset that. So I'll talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. And also parts come into play with MOW and commuter rail. But the big savings is always diesel in these areas. But you think about bus and the diesel savings, that was somewhere in $1.9 million. So that almost got entirely offset by something else. And here's the wages and benefits. There's two areas where we were over budget. It looks like we're going to be over budget. One's wages and benefits, and we have to look at, it's mainly that leave time issue we've talked about before and the accrual. So as we look at the 2020 budget, we'll want to address that in particular because everything else pretty much offset. The leave time, we were 2 million over. So everything else with wages and benefits, we were 700,000 to the good.
Bob, it's just unique and it's a one-time adjustment, or is it an ongoing adjustment that we're just...
It's an
currently
ongoing
recognizing?
adjustment. It's an ongoing adjustment, and so we're required under GAAP to record the liabilities.
Sure.
So there's two major things. For sick leave, that accrual starts when someone hits 55. Well, it's accrued, but we record the liability at 55. And so there can be some big changes when someone turns 55. And then we also have to take into account anytime we increase someone's pay, that increases that accumulated accrual also. So we're playing catch up on this one. But fortunately, we have other savings to help offset that. And then the second one is parts, where I know we made some changes in the 2020 budget for parts, and we also made some changes in 2020 for the benefit accrual. I'm not sure we've made enough on the benefit accrual. Hopefully, we've made enough on the parts. Again, fuel is mainly diesel. There's some other savings in there with other fuels. Services, it's mainly ITT, 1.5 million, and legal of 800,000. Utilities, that's the propulsion power of 1.1 million, as well as telephone, 700,000. And then the other is purchase transportation, 2.1 million, and the insurance, 2.2 million. So we'll be closing out the books. We'll get our final revenue numbers in, and we'll be including that in the CAFR that will come out in May. So we'll wait until we have audited numbers to give you the final 2019, unless you want something sooner than that.
Questions for Bob? Or that was helpful, thank you. And we'll be interested to understand maybe the sort of long-term liability factor on that benefits accrual. That would be helpful to
Yeah,
understand.
it's something in the budget process we just need to spend some extra time on this year. And I know Brad's back there making notes already.
Yeah.
He's probably already thinking about it, so.
Okay, great, thank you. I think that brings us to another item of yours. That brings us to resolutions, and the first item up is a resolution declaring official intent of the authority to reimburse itself for certain capital expenditures through lease financing.
Okay, thank you. So the 2020 capital budget anticipated that we would lease for buses, paratransit, van pool, and bus validators. The total amount's 30.3 million, a little bit over that. So, we talked about this last year about this time. There's a timing issue when it comes to financing these things. Vehicles and other equipment will show up throughout the year, but it's advantageous to do the leasing at one time. And so we try to time the leasing with when the majority of the vehicles are here, usually the buses, that's the big dollar amount. And so we try to do the financing right then, which is typically later in the year. But to finance those at that time, you have to do a notice of reimbursement intent so that you put that stake in the ground that says, okay, everything from this date forward, we intend to include in that financing. If you don't do that, you can only go back 60 days from the financing. So that's why we do this reimbursement intent.
Does this give you a window larger than 60 days, or you're only...
Right, it gives us larger than 60 days. So it would go back 60 days from today's resolution.
I see.
I only need it to January 1st, but this would cover the entire fiscal year.
Okay.
And then we can make the decision later on when to do the financing. And that's also helpful because we don't always know exactly when we do the budget what the actual costs will be for these items.
Yeah.
So that allows us to, when we get closer doing financing, be more specific. We've often budgeted more than we've leased when it comes down to the lease amount. So what the reimbursement resolution does is it establishes a maximum reimbursement amount at the budgeted amount, and then it just allows us to include these items in the financing from January 1st forward. And Aaron Wade is here to answer any questions if you've got questions about the resolution itself or the federal law.
Beth?
I just had a quick question, if you could just clarify again. I know the majority of this goes to buses, but what other things does this cover as well?
So it includes paratransit vehicles and van pool vans. And the buses, we're looking at doing 14 years. Paratransit and van pool, we're looking at going 6 years because we've done some analysis, and that seems to be the useful life. We'll take a better look at that when it comes time to do the actual financing. And then bus validators. Now, this is what we have in the budget, but as you know, we're also doing a study looking at fare collection. And so this allows us to do some bus validators, but we're holding off until we've done this other study and understand better where we're heading with our fare collection system.
I know we've kind of exceeded the useful life of the current validators. Do you have enough to sort of nurse it along till we get to a decision?
Well, I understand we'll buy enough to get through the period where we think we'll be making decision with the fare collection.
Yeah. Okay. Other questions? All right. Seeing none, I would entertain a motion on this resolution.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution declaring official intent of the authority to reimburse itself for certain capital expenditures through lease financing.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Bob. The next item up, and as Kim comes forward, is a resolution setting compensation for district officers and administrative employees and appointing officers. Kim?
Hello, thank you so much. Yes, the resolution that you have in front of you really is just to set our 2020 salary structure for our administrative employees. The structure was updated over the 2019 structure and has been included as part of the resolution. The resolution also appoints a number of officers that are required by state statute to include Mr. Robert Biles as the Secretary Treasurer, the areas as our Chief Internal Auditor, and Troy Bingham as the Authority's Comptroller. We previously set Carolyn Gannat as the Executive Director in a previous resolution, so that's referenced here. I am recommending we make one small amendment to the resolution, just in number 1, that we clarify this is for administrative employees because there is a separate process for our bargaining unit employees.
And do we need to make that as part of our motion, or are you just clarifying that the resolution just pertains to administrative?
I would prefer to amend the resolution. It says it in the title, but I think it's important to just make that distinction in item number 1. But I would defer to you all how you would.
Well, I don't think we have any opposition to clarifying that at all.
Thank you.
So I would entertain a motion on the resolution. Ken, are you?
Yes, I would move that we approve the resolution setting compensation for district officers and administrative employees and appointing officers, with the clarification and addition amendment that this is applicable to administrative employees.
I'll second.
Have a motion and a second, and also amendment to the resolution clarifying which employee set is covered, and any other discussion? Seeing none, I'll ask for a roll call.
Trustee Millington.
Aye.
Trustee Holbrook.
Aye.
Chair Christensen.
Aye.
It's unanimous. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. Next up is our contracts, disbursements, and grants. And first up is a pass-through funds agreement for development of coordinated and comprehensive specialized transportation plan with UDOT. Eddie, welcome back.
Thank you. It's under better circumstances. This is a revenue contract with UDOT to receive pass-through funds in the amount of $250,000. Just a little background: in the 2019 Utah State Legislative Session, Senate Bill 3, Item 142 appropriated $492,200 of one-time general funds in fiscal year 2020. UTA was appropriated $250,000 of those funds to develop a comprehensive plan to address problem with limited transportation options for seniors, persons with disabilities, and other transportation disadvantaged groups. The purpose of this project, as Ryan has spoken to the board a couple of times on, the purpose of this project is to coordinate all specialized transportation that is provided by human service agencies along the Wasatch Front. Based on this appropriation, the UTA Coordinated Mobility Department developed a project scope, issued an RFP, and selected RLS and Associates as the contractor. This project is currently underway and scheduled for completion in early Q4 2020. Utah Code mandates that UDOT not provide UTA with state pass-through funding without an executed agreement. This agreement is a requirement in order for UTA to receive the funds appropriated by the legislature. Any questions?
So if I'm understanding it, this is really the mechanism in which we get the state funding that we've already sort of advanced the work on.
Yes.
At this point.
That's correct.
Okay. And it also noted this goes well beyond our service area. It's sort of, while we've been tasked with this really is going to include agencies well beyond, our...
So I think in this particular situation, this is focused on the Wasatch Front.
just on our
Obviously,
area.
it's something that can be duplicated, right?
Okay.
With coordination, and so it's something that could be coordinated elsewhere, but this is focused exclusively on the Wasatch Front area.
Thank you for...
Then do we have a, sorry.
No, please.
Do we have then an obligation to forward any findings that could be applicable throughout the state to those other agencies, or is this just where it's just our focus?
I'd have to check with Ryan Taylor on that. I'm not aware of any requirements to do that, but I think with, it's probably just the appropriate thing to do if we learn something.
Thanks.
Eddie, I don't think our plan, we don't have a plan.
Cheryl, we probably should have you come forward and use otherwise the folks over my right shoulder will chew me out afterwards.
Yeah, you get some.
And they're nasty about it. they're kind people. They're just nasty about that piece.
We don't have an obligation to, but part of our coordination efforts will be to share that information.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah, thank you. Any other questions on this contract? Okay. If not, I would entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion that we approve the contract for the pass-through funds agreement for the development of a coordinated and comprehensive specialized transportation plan through UTA.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thanks.
Thank
Eddie.
you.
Our next item up is a real estate contract for the Ogden-Weber State University Bus Rapid Transit right-of-way parcel acquisition with Carriage Cleaners. Paul?
All right, trustees, thank you. Again, I'm Paul Drake. I'm the Senior Manager of Real Estate and Transit-Oriented Development. As you know, we have been buying property for the upcoming, the Ogden-Weber State University BRT. And I have Gail Paget in the audience. She has been acting as our acquisition agent on this particular property. So if we have any questions, we could definitely pull her up. This property is located at 3205 Harrison Boulevard in Ogden. Contains 3,500-ish square feet. 35,000 square feet, or roughly 0.8 acres. Pending board approval, we've agreed to pay the seller $650,400 for the property. $20,000 of that will be held in escrow to help mitigate a small environmental issue on the site. We expect there's an estimate of $10,000 to remediate that. So once it's done, we will release the rest of those funds to the seller.
Is that environmental problem from the solutions used
I believe so.
that have been,
It is a dry cleaner.
right?
Yes.
So some of the solutions that they've used have gotten into the ground.
As they often do with
Yeah.
dry
Yeah,
cleaning
with
places.
cleaners, yeah.
Can I ask a question on that one?
Go ahead.
How confident are we about the extent of that? And the reason I ask is because, and they've usually been larger laundry facilities, but in the past, and it's questionable whether it was caused by the VA hospital, but it caused some pretty serious contamination of some water storage areas in the ground, under the VA up on that.
Sure.
East side of
I'm not the environmental expert, but we did have our environmental expert out there. Buffy Chornos was on site. She evaluated it. She feels fairly confident that we're in there. But as you saw, the estimate is $10,000. We put on plenty of contingency, so we're holding off twice that much in order to make sure that that gets done right and that we're not on the hook.
Okay.
The subject property is located on the corner of Harrison and 32nd. That's where we have a planned BRT station. Because of that station, we're planning on widening the corridor significantly there, and that's what has necessitated the full taking of the property. Anyway, the staff recommends and requests that the Board of Trustees approves the purchase of the subject property and authorizes the executive director to execute the contract and related documents as described. Do you have any other questions?
Any other questions?
I don't have any questions. I'm just excited that this is the next step and the next phase of this BRT line. I get comments every now and then from people who are like, Ogden-Weber, we're excited. Just want you to know that. That's all they say to me even. That just want you to know I'm very excited. Thank
It's
you.
an exciting project. I think the feeling's mutual.
If there are no other questions, I would entertain a motion on this particular contract.
I am very happy to make a motion to approve the real estate contract, the Ogden-Weber State University Bus Rapid Transit right-of-way parcel acquisition with Carriage Cleaners.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you. Next item up is C, and it's a change order for project management services contract with an extension with WSP. And Mary Colorado, thank you.
Good morning. This contract is for professional program management services. The original contract with WSP March 3rd, 2014 to provide program management services for a 5-year period. The contract also included 3 one-year options from that. And last year we executed the first of those 1-year options, which will expire March 3rd of this year. And we are executing, this is a request to execute the second of those 1-year options, which would extend the contract with WSP March 3rd, 2021. We do intend to go out for an RFP this year rather than execute that last option. So this change order would be for an amount of $3.99 million for the professional services that they provide over the year. Some of the specific things that they've helped us with are project management, design reviews, construction quality oversight, right-of-way services, positive train control integration, specialty track design, grant writing, FTA consultation, and a lot more. So that's what we intend to have them help us on the airport project this year, on the Ogden-Weber State BRT project, and cost estimating, things like that. So any questions?
Can I just clarify? I know we said that we are going out for an RFP this year. That doesn't mean we won't execute the third 1 year, because we may want to keep the staff that's on another team on forward, so we could so that we want that continuity of the staff to finish off a project that we're working on if whoever we select is different than WSP. So just to be
And I
clear,
said
it gives us some.
hourly based off of whatever project.
It's usually time and materials, is that?
Yeah, it's,
Yes.
yeah. Yeah, and the attorney said when the RFP goes out, we just have to include in there that if somebody else gets selected, the incumbent we may award that 1-year option left to the incumbent.
Any other questions though from Harry? If there aren't any, I would entertain a motion on this contract.
I move that we approve this change order extending the project management services contract with WSP for an additional year.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion passes. Thank you, Mary. That then brings us to pre-procurement, and invite Todd up, and you're hoping that we'll learn something. I see.
Morning, Mr. Chair, trustees. We have 2 procurements to bring to you this morning. The first one is a purchase to install a new learning management system software to track training requirements and records of UTA employees. The current system is outdated and no longer meets the needs of the growing agency. We will be requesting proposals for software systems that can provide all of our operational, audit trail, and record management needs going forward. The contract will be for a base term of 3 years with 2 one-year options. This will be an RFP procurement with selection based on technical criteria in addition to price. I have Dave Schroeder here with me, who's the organizational development consultant, to answer any questions you might have on this system and the need that we have.
Welcome, Dave. I will miss occasionally having the learning system bug out, like when I get 3/4 of the way through the module. But aside from that, do you see opportunities for the learning system to be expanded and used in other kinds of training and opportunities.
Well, most definitely. The main thing is that we want to provide managers and supervisors with a better tool to enable them to track and oversee the progress of the people in their groups as far as taking their training. Right now, it's very difficult for them, as you know, to see that and to provide proper oversight over training. So the new systems we're looking at will provide that. They're really a step above what we currently have.
I imagine there's a lot out in that field that have similar capabilities. I mean, do you feel like you get a fairly competitive?
We think so. There are 3 or 4 vendors that we're looking at that we believe are very promising. We've looked at what the state is using. We have the option outside of the RFP to kind of use the same system that the state is using. We just prefer to go both routes and see which provides us with a better alternative.
Sure. Okay. Other questions on that one? Okay. Thank you for that background.
The second one we have is a procurement to establish a panel of qualified outside attorneys and law firms to assist the assistant attorney generals assigned to the agency in matters where special legal expertise is required. The panel of attorneys and/or law firms will be selected based on qualifications and areas of expertise. This will be a 5-year agreement, and contracted attorneys and/or law firms will be required to hold hourly rates firm for the first 3 years. And we have David Wilkins here from the Attorney General's office.
Welcome, David.
Thank you. Traditionally, the in-house legal department at UTA, back when it was the General Counsel's office and later the legal department, made extensive use of outside counsel, which is not uncommon for a corporate-type legal department. One of the advantages brought along by the changes with SB 136 with the Attorney General's office is that the Attorney General's office is essentially the largest law firm in the state of Utah, and the bench at the office is very deep. Even with that deep bench, there are still several smaller discrete areas in which UTA will need or could need outside legal assistance for. There's also 2 litigation matters that predated the transition that the client, UTA, wishes to keep with outside counsel. Working with the client and with Mike Bell, we were able to take the old RFP and pare it down significantly for the areas of expertise that UTA would need outside legal support. An additional area that Chief Ross requested was to be able to provide attorneys for police officers, UTA police officers that are involved in critical incidents, which is very important. Other police departments do provide this, either that or through the Employees Association.
It does make some sense. Any questions, however, for David?
You mentioned that you've pared this down to include just the subject areas where we may need to go outside?
That is correct. They're very specific subject areas, such as labor relations, bond counsel. Even the state of Utah uses outside counsel for bonding, bonding and lease issues. There is a general litigation catch-all in case there were something to come up that would be needed. But these are very, very specific, discrete areas.
But it doesn't stop us if we needed someone outside counsel to come back to the board.
That is correct.
To bring it for other specialized work, right?
That is correct.
This just allows a panel for them to work with.
It gives us a list that we can call on if the need arises on specific subject areas. But, we can always be very flexible with the board meeting frequently if we needed to find somebody else that our office couldn't find somebody with that expertise. We would come back to you with that.
Any other questions? All right. Well, we'll hope for good responses then on both subjects. Thank you, Todd. Let's see. Why don't we go ahead with at least discussion item number 1, which is budget amendment number 1, and have Bob back, and then we may take a short break after that. So.
Yeah, most people want a break after talking about budget. This is
just
budget.
Too hard on us, Bob.
Yeah,
so.
I know. See, this gets me energized. We're talking numbers. So this is the proposed operating budget. Again, it's just a discussion. What will happen is if the board's okay with the items that are being included in this, we'll go to local advisory council next week and then come back to the board 2 weeks from now with a resolution. So this is the operating side of the budget, and there's a couple of things that we think could be amended here. One, it's really related to the planning studies and the carryover of 4 particular studies. We have some new funding on the Service Choices one of $200,000, and then there's new funding on the Tooele Valley Transit feasibility to cover a wider variety of activities, is the way I understand. We provided detail in the packet for you on each of those, and there are people in the audience who can help if you go much past that in your questioning. So the total adjustment is about $499,000, if I remember correctly, and part of that will be covered by the sales tax revenues. We talked about that earlier, that we're seeing good growth at the very end of 2019. It's probably a little bit more than that, but we need $479 to make this budget amendment work. And then the $20,000 from MAG and UDOT. So the way it would look on the Schedule A is sales tax would be increased by $479,000, other revenues by $20,000, and then the non-operating expense, because that's where the planning department resides, would be up by $499,000. And that is the quick tour of the operating budget amendments. It's just the carry forward mainly of these planning studies that we'd hoped would get done in 2019, but they're just carrying over into 2020. Heading on to the capital, if you didn't have any questions about that, there's 5 particular projects. Some of them are funded by carryover, some of it's new funding, and then some of it's a reallocation from our capital contingency. So we have 2 carryover projects, the Sharp-Tinnick Railroad connection and the 650 South Track Station. Those were budgeted in 2019, but the work is moving over into 2020, and actually Sharp-Tinnick, the majority of work will probably be in 2021. So this is mainly the design and getting ready to do the construction. New funding, we have the Northern Utah County Double Track. That's money coming in from UDOT, if I remember correctly, and they just asked us to combine the project and do the work together. And then the Paxton Avenue Tracks Crossing, I don't remember exactly who that's from, but anyway, source of funding to do that one. And then the reallocations for the 650 South Track Station, we're in for $20,000. And then the last project is Reconfigure Meadowbrook Gate. That's related to our fare collection activity and the work that Troy Bingham's been doing and others to improve our fare collection activities.
Can I ask a question? And I know I think I have a meeting scheduled or something on the 650 South track station. And I know there's really, since its original construction, there's always been, I call them a wow. There was a place built out, and I know that some development is potentially taking place. I assume by virtue of this that project continues to move forward. And
Let me ask Mary or someone else to come up here and who are more familiar with that project and answer that question.
Just to date me, that was actually the original site for the RSL Stadium, but it didn't work out between the legislature and the former mayor. So,
Yes, that has always been planned as a future station. As you said, the tracks were wowed out to make it easier to install a station when the demand warranted it. We're now at that point. The city has been meeting with us regularly, and the developer is on board, and that would be funded almost entirely by the city and the developer for that project.
You will see a ILA come probably over the next month or so to the board between us and the city.
The funding agreement for that.
For the funding.
Thank you.
Other questions on the particular projects before we take a look at what it does to Exhibit A?
And tell me what the Paxton I'm thinking of is down by the ballpark area.
Correct. There's some issues with the safety of that crossing, and the city is funding that entirely to improve that crossing there.
Okay. All right.
did have a question about the Northern Utah County double track, and maybe, I thought that original amount was $4 million, but you have 3.5. Did we already use $500,000 of that?
Correct. UDOT is using that for the design right now.
Okay, thanks.
So the changes to the official budget, this is the revenue side. UTA funding goes up $40,000. That's coming out of our bank account, so to speak. Then we have grants of $424,000, local partner contributions of $520,000, and then the state $3.5 million. So almost all of these are being funded by somebody else. And then on the expense side, this is where you can see the reallocation from contingency up into the other capital projects. So it's about $60,000 taken out of contingency, reduces the contingency to $940,000. And then the next steps, again, going to local advisory council and then coming back here in 2 weeks.
Any questions for Bob? Thanks for that introduction, and we'll look forward to any discussion by the advisory council. So thank you. Why don't we just take a short break, and we'll reconvene about 10 after 10. We welcome you back from our break, and we're going to come back to an item that we skipped over real briefly, and that is our legislative and government affairs update. Invite Shul Bishop, our director, to give us an update on where a couple things are.
Okay, so just actually just this morning, they've been doing appropriations requests. So in social services, we had our state volunteer, the voucher request that was presented. Senator Harper has requested this one. It's for $350,000 ongoing money for that state voucher, and Ryan and Christy were there presenting, and they did a good job. And I think it was well received. Also, yesterday there was the Point of the Mountain study request that was in IGG.
Can I ask a question on the voucher?
Oh, sure.
That's really the funding mechanism that was discussed kind of in our last meeting that kind of didn't exist statewide. Is that right? Potentially.
I believe
I'm
so.
seeing some nodding heads by
okay.
Cheryl, so it looks like almost
I can ask
you're
the
nodding
audience.
your head. Sure. But okay, I just wanted to make sure that's the same thing.
Yeah, and it's a pretty cool program they got. And then yesterday was the Point of the Mountain study request in IGG, which Representative Snow is doing. It's for $250,000 to finish that. The
alternative analysis.
Yeah, the analysis, and possibly $3.5 million for environmental. And then also yesterday was the REL study that Senator Andrig put in a request also for $2.1 million for the REL study. So that's what's been going on so far.
Any questions from the board members? All right. Thanks for that update, Shul. Appreciate it. We'll go down to discussion item number 11B, which is the Woods Cross Station Area Plan. And we haven't had a station area plan for about a year, so this is good. We're hopeful that the upcoming, or during the session, that we'll get a lift on caps and things and be able to see more of these, yeah. But
Oh, absolutely. We have
it's
a lot
nice
of,
to see them moving forward, nevertheless.
we have a lot of communities that are excited about these plans and excited about the potential of the cap being raised. So, agree. Okay, so as you mentioned, we're here to present the stationary plan for the Woods Cross Station. This is an informal informational item only. We're not asking for any action today by the board. We will take it to the local advisory council, and upon their approval, we'll bring it back to the board for formal adoption. Okay. As a reminder, the station area plan is a shared regional, local, and UTA vision that's roughly half a mile around each fixed rail station. It includes extensive community outreach and culminates in strategic recommendations, which is an implementation plan to make sure that vision is realized. Performing a stationary plan is one of the main criteria to make a site eligible to be selected by you, the Board of Trustees, and move on to development. You can see this is our framework. It outlined in red is the approval stage for the station area plan. That whole blue line right there above it is the station area plan process. And as you can see, after adoption by the board, it can move forward if selected. This plan was funded by WFRC's Transportation and Land Use Connections Program. They continue to be a great advocate for these plans. The city actually requested the funds, and the city ran this plan through that program. Woods Cross has been a great partner in helping us to understand the city's objectives for this area, along with the opportunities and constraints of the site. That's a benefit of the station area planning process. It helps us to understand the context of each site before going into development. And we try and push the envelope as far as realistically possible, given those constraints. And you'll see that there are significant constraints on this site, and that kind of drove some of the aspects of this plan. Kevin Leo is also in the audience. He was our representative with the city and WFRC preparing this plan. So the study area is primarily north and west of the Front Runner Station. You can see where that is. It's called out. and connects to 500 South and the freeway interchange to the east there. It contemplates significant transit service, including front-runner bus and a potential BRT. This relatively small area already includes a mix of residential, office, and industrial uses. And the primary constraint of this site is its proximity to the refinery, Holly Refinery, to the north. There was significant public engagement effort, and that resulted in 3 development scenarios. These scenarios were presented as separate concepts, but they're really not mutually exclusive. They're really iterative. The first scenario contemplates minimal change and looks primarily at the UTA-controlled properties around the station. This scenario proposes a transit plaza where it's shown as the station square there. Some small-scale retail directly adjacent to the station. UTA's parking need would be accommodated to the north in a parking lot there, which also doubles as a cap for contaminated soil, as well as a lot off the south end of the platform. The next scenario contemplates a little bit more development. The south parking would be replaced by some residential uses, and the parking is picked up on the other end of the tracks, on that west end there. This scenario also contemplates improved connections to the west. These are critical, as you'll see in the next scenario, as the main bulk of the development potential has been identified as west of the tracks. And then this also contemplates that pedestrian bridge.
Paul, can I ask you to go back? How those park and rides to the north, I guess, how far are they from the station itself?
They're within 1,000 feet. That north one actually exists already, or just north on the east side of the track. It already exists. It's not heavily used right now.
That's the one that says, what, 338 spaces?
Yep.
Okay.
You're going to say something, Beth?
Excuse me, I was just going to say, I was just going to echo what you said. So this is where I would go if I were going to do that. And the station, or the park and ride right there, that is, if you get to the furthermost northern eastern portion of that, it is a little bit far, but I think that there's still a lot of interest in using it, I think. So it's still doable.
So this is the area you would be assigned in the storms?
That is correct. This is my communication area, so
Okay.
They're shoveling
just
snow.
so everyone knows.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. The final scenario or iteration, it fleshes out those uses on the west end of the rail line. They're proposing additional office, retail, and restaurant space. This reflects the input that we got, and as I just described, the development potential is mainly to the west, where there's some vacant properties and there's fewer constraints with the adjacent residential. I guess to stay there, those east-west connections in any of these scenarios are really critical. We want to make sure to optimize how people get to the station, and especially if these uses are realized, there's a lot of potential for ridership. You can also see on my left, hopefully it's your left too, where it says potential housing. There's additional vacant property out there where the city contemplates additional high-density mixed use. The preferred scenario right now is the target. They identified the middle of the road plan, again with the small mix of uses at the platform, parking on the north, pedestrian connections to the west of the station, and those residential uses right there at the platform. I don't know if I made enough or emphasized it enough, but there are office uses that are also contemplated just to the east of the park and ride. This would continue the office development that already exists there, but that is what is market reasonable in that area. Recommendations to implement this plan include a study to see the feasibility of that ped bike bridge, setting up a vehicle to capture the tax increment to pay for some of those public improvements, securing the city's public infrastructure funding, adjust the zoning to accommodate the proposed uses. Any questions?
Where is the city in their actual evaluation of the plan and adoption? Have they already done that? Are they in the process of doing that?
I believe they have. Kevin, would you come on up? So this is Kevin Leo, as I said, is our project manager on this plan.
I mean, I think about it, and it's kind of the one area where Woods Cross itself could grow a little bit. I mean, potentially, it's been pretty landlocked, but they've done some redevelopment on the old Kmart site. And, I just know that it has a lot of potential.
That's correct. So the city has seen the plan and their city council has acknowledged it. I think right now they're in the process of studying the feasibility of some of these things like a pedestrian bridge or any kind of increased access in terms of trails or walking paths to get to the station. They are a pretty small community, so and their planning staff is pretty small as well. So this is quite, I guess, quite a feat for them. They just recently completed their a general plan update, and so I think they're just trying to meld this all together and kind of see the direction their city wants to go in the future.
I think one thing that you're getting at, generally we like to see higher densities proposed in our station area plans. As I mentioned, this whole process kind of brought out a lot of constraints of the site. We did have a lot of involvement from the neighboring community, those neighbors there, and a lot of input from the city. We didn't get much from Holly Refinery, it sounds like, but there was concern about higher densities in that area as that refinery is right there and there's a potential hazard. And so the consultant really reacted to that and the input that they were getting from the city in the proposed uses.
And the density doesn't bother me as much in the sense of, what I was wondering about is in the initial chart when you show the process, it shows kind of local adoption. And I didn't want to get too far out in front of this city until we, sort of knew where their elected officials wanted to go with the plan and whether they were, at least seriously considering adoption or if they are just unwilling to go there. That was my only thought. At first blush, it doesn't give me any grief. I just wondered where they might be in their own process.
Understood.
And do you have any sense of that, Kevin, at this point?
In terms of, I think they're pretty much in agreement with the stationary plan, and they think that there's a lot of ways to increase access, and I think access is the main thing that they're concerned about. 500 South is a interchange, and it also is at-grade crossing, so oftentimes that intersection gets blocked by Union Pacific traffic or freight traffic, and it just makes it impossible for people to travel that area. In some of the higher, greater change scenarios that were contemplated by this, a road would be maybe put in to the south, just kind of near our pedestrian bridge. That would allow people to, bypass that other intersection if there was a train crossing there. Most of the city's developable land left is on the west side, and so I think they see that as a really key aspect to future growth of the west side, northwest quadrant of their city. And so I think they definitely are in support of this. They just need to figure out how much money they really have to be able to invest in this. I know that there have been some discussions with UDOT for years and years about that issue. I'm not sure, any kind of recent resolution can happen on that. But I think it outlines a path for them to go forward and lets them know different priorities that they should take if they want to achieve that vision.
One other aspect, our policy right now stops short of requiring a community to formally adopt the station area plan. It does require that they acknowledge it, which the city has. That's something that maybe the board could contemplate, or whether we want to ratchet up that requirement or not. for future plans, but they have acknowledged it, so technically they are in compliance with our policy.
I wouldn't want to change the sort of the terms with them. I mean, if that's our policy. But I also, just from an optics standpoint, would hate to get so far out in front of them and then say, yeah, we saw the plan, but we don't agree with it, or this isn't what we want in our city. And because there's, I'm not worried. I mean, Woods Cross is a very reasonable community, and so it doesn't keep me awake at night wondering. I mean, I think if they were opposed, they would probably convey it. I just kind of wanted a sense, and maybe Beth, you have a good idea.
So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Some of the things that they are talking about is really that connectivity piece, and that's what they're most excited about, because, like Kevin mentioned, that northwest quadrant is actually really still got some open space. There's still land to be developed, and that's where they would like to see some of that future growth. There's a main thoroughfare, it's 8th West, I believe, that really has become more and more dense for Woods Cross. We're not talking super high density, but for Woods Cross, it's a density area that they've really kind of been encouraging, because they're wanting to kind of keep their more dense versions along this main thoroughfare as far as the city goes, and then the area that they're doing all of that in is just south of what they're proposing on this station area.
Where is 8th West in connection with this plan?
It's the west side of our station. So that's the portion that they're talking about in terms of having the availability to have that connectivity. The constraints that are on the east side are, as you can see, it's mostly developed out, number one, and there could be some modifications to that, but it's really that western portion that they would want to have.
That's where they really want the
continued
development,
connection.
is going on this west side.
Right.
Okay.
And to mention the constraints of the site, there was an explosion there in Holly. I believe it was Holly, I'm not 100% sure, about 7-8 years ago, that caused some challenges to the residential areas immediately adjacent. And so they are making sure that does not become a factor. So that's why they had that discussion in terms of the constraints.
And this explosion didn't happen at Holly. It was at Silver Eagle or something.
Yeah, Silver Eagle.
Which is
Sorry, that's what I was thinking.
south of the site. And I think that was in the news quite a bit. But I think because they saw kind of that impact, they just wanted to be a little more careful around this one too.
Overall, though, I do think that, thanks, Kevin, for that. I do know that this is something that the city wants to kind of get engaged in and help their residents to understand kind of what they're thinking long term. So your point is very well taken.
Sorry, Paul, I probably cut you off. Did you have some more? Okay.
Well, that's it. Do you have any more questions for us?
So at this point, you present the plan to the advisory council for their input and
Correct.
recommendations maybe, and then what come back to us.
Yeah, by state statute, they need to approve these plans, and then they need to be adopted by the Board of Trustees.
I think we decided it's recommend these plans, right? Yeah. So,
Okay.
yeah, that's getting clarified too. So,
Okay. Great.
Good.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that presentation. We'll next go to UTA Fair Policy, and Monica, welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So yes, our discussion topic today is the fair policy. A draft was included in the board packet, but I'll go over each section of the policy with you today. I want to gather your feedback and address any questions or concerns that you might have about the policy. So let's start with the purpose. The purpose of this policy is to guide staff in the administration and operation of the fair system. And if you'll remember from a prior presentation, the fair system is the combined elements of pricing, policy, and payment, the 3 Ps. So I'd like to go over an outline. First, we'll talk about the fair system in general. The next section will be the pricing structure. We'll go over fare adjustments, complimentary passes, special pricing, and fare administration. And fare administration will include 4 subsections. Those are fare collection, payment, media, and last validation and enforcement. So I'm happy to pause for feedback between each of these sections and or take feedback and questions at the end. So first, our fare system will generate revenue through passenger fares to cover a reasonable portion of the operating expenses. Second, we need to set a fare box recovery ratio and cost of collection target. The fare box recovery is a metric that tells us what portion of operating costs are recovered through fares, and this is important to understand, to monitor, to report on. And we will also use data and analytics to inform decisions. We have a lot of data and analytics. We want to continue to use those. Policy values are included in this draft copy of policy, and I want to share those with you because we consider them our guiding principles that direct our future strategy. So simple and easy. The fare structure is simple and easy for riders to understand. It's convenient. Fare payment maximizes the convenience of paying fares. It's seamless. Fare payment facilitates seamless travel between all transportation modes inside and outside of UTA. Flexible, anticipates and implements innovative and cost-effective technology. Equitable, eliminates barriers that limit access to transportation for disadvantaged rider groups. Efficient, focuses on improved operational efficiency. And last, we want it to be sustainable, supports long-term financial planning and sustainable transit services over the long term. The executive director will report to the Board of Trustees annually and more if necessary. There is a lot of information that can be summarized, compared, and reported on that will help us communicate the state of the fare system every year. And the executive director will create procedures to execute this policy. And I do want to point out that this policy is a broad level policy with content that will need to be supported by SOPs to provide additional guidance and direction. And currently, there are multiple SOPs spread throughout the organization that touch on fares, but with your support, I can work with Carolyn and Bob and pull those together and draft an updated set that support this policy directly. So this is essentially a summary of the fare system. I'll now move on to the next section, which is pricing structure, unless you have any questions on what I've covered here. So go ahead.
I just have one, and I think it really goes beyond the fare piece. And it's just something for us to look at, particularly as you're going to go through and evaluate pricing and stuff. And it's something that back from my city council days we did that just was from a practical standpoint, and that is you had sort of one rate schedule or fare schedule that policies referred to. It used to be that when people were looking for what you charge for this or what you charge for that, you were hopping around through a zillion ordinances, and nobody could go to one sheet and say, here's what the city, or in our case, UTA, charges for X. And just from both an administrative and transparency, we've, after a lot of rewriting, they got it down to one schedule. And so somewhere, I think, whether there's a fare schedule and a fee schedule or something, as we get through policies, it'd be great to sort of migrate to something along that line.
Absolutely. Thank you for that comment. The pricing structure, first, is the concept of the base rate, and that's currently $2.50. To simplify the pricing structure, an option is that we could use multipliers to the base rate to set the price for the other fares. We discussed this during a board meeting in November, and I'll demonstrate that again, how this concept could work after I'm done with this slide. But we do have the option to charge a premium fare, and this could be on the cost to operate the service if that's higher or longer than average trip lengths, or if we provide additional amenities. Free, the pricing structure will identify groups that may ride free of charge, including the parameters by which they can ride free of charge, and that usually varies by rider group. Discounts. The pricing structure will set discounts to comply with FTA regulations, provide equity among rider groups with a limited ability to pay, incentivize riders through promotional fares, and also create pricing parameters for bulk purchases and pass programs. Transfers. The pricing structure will provide a time frame to complete a trip for trips that include traveling on more than one mode to get to where people need to go. And then the pricing structure would also allow for other adjustments such as time of day to encourage travel for off-peak hours. Although that technology is not fully implemented yet, it would support the adoption of things like preferred fare media, capped values, unlimited rides for a designated time period, or transportation services that supplement our current fixed route. So this is the example of using multipliers. So we would establish a rate, which you can see in the center column, and we would multiply it by the base rate to determine the fare. So I'd like to take this example one more step and show you how a simplified fare structure might look by approving or by applying this concept of multipliers. For years, we've heard from internal staff and riders that the fare structure is complicated and hard to understand, but this is an approach here that we could take towards simplification, and you can see how much cleaner this looks. So in a nutshell, the concepts written into this policy for pricing will make several options available for us to simplify and improve the status quo. So now I would like to discuss the process for fare adjustments, unless I can answer any questions on pricing. So fare adjustments is another key area of guidance that it's important to provide staff, and the draft fare policy has a section dedicated to providing a very predictable and consistent fare adjustment process so that both UTA and riders can plan for changes. So first, every 2 years, we'll perform an analysis relating to a potential adjustment, and we expect the adjustment to support long-term financial planning. We expect it to be modest, rational, and explainable, to provide a steady and anticipated revenue stream, and to take into consideration changes to things like the inflation rate, subsidy per rider, and the fare box recovery ratio.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
How do you foresee that of applying, like with EcoPass programs, where you have an employer? We recently did like the University of Utah, and I think what was anticipated is that there would be some fare increases, but it was a 10-year deal, and we made some adjustments because we simply didn't would those agreements probably be shorter time periods to reflect this?
So not necessarily. This, would be an adjustment to the public fare. Obviously, we could go in and look at our past programs because those are based off of the public fare rate and see what change would need to happen there. But typically there's enough wiggle room within the contract, and usage usually doesn't get as high as it needs to warrant probably a big enough change to the contract every 2 years.
We could go forward and base the contract to deal with the fare adjustments we would have, because I don't think they'd have to worry that we'd jump up something $1 or something. It wouldn't be that, we're dealing with the public, but we could base it more on there.
Both ways, we decide we don't want to do a fare increase for some reason, and they should probably have the benefit of that in their contract. But on the other hand, if we do, then at the very least, we should somehow split the difference with them till the end of their contract.
Yes, we do have a lot of annual contracts. This will work well with those. Like you said, we do have some longer 10-year contracts with some of the universities, and typically we do and have tried to put clauses in there that would make mention of some type of an adjustment that would or could be necessary if it was needed. But a lot of them have increases already built in to account for things like this. Okay, so now let's see. Next, part of this analysis that occurs every 2 years, we would create a fare change proposal, and the proposal will include what we propose as the adjustment to be. We could include an updated pricing table, a financial analysis of the impact of these adjustments and that impact that it would have, and a comparison of peer agencies and other transit mode pricing, and then of course the recommendation to the board. So this fare change proposal would be prepared by staff and looked at every 2 years. And then, of course, we'll continue to perform a Title VI analysis. And then we would also do our, because we do recognize that both of these are key to a successful fair adjustment. And if the results of the analysis and outreach, it may be that they require, that we require revisiting any changes to our adjustment before it takes effect. And that is adjustments in a nutshell. Do you have any other additional questions or concerns on adjustments? So we'll talk now a little bit about complimentary passes. These are for small and short-term events or for local travel needs, and it also includes passes that are used by staff to support operating functions. The policy supports sponsorships and other forms of recognition that promote goodwill towards the authority in exchange for complimentary passes. All sponsorships and any passes that do exceed $5,000 in value would be presented to you for approval. And that's it on complimentary passes. Special pricing. So this next section is special pricing, and I'll talk first about pilots and promotions. Pilots and promotions can be implemented to do things like test new media, new programs, concepts, ideas, to incentivize riders and to increase awareness of transit services. For example, we did the Buddy Pass on tracks back in October to encourage people to bring a friend along and introduce maybe some potential new riders to the system. We're also doing a pilot right now for the low income, and so both of these are examples of instances of pilots and promotions that the policy does allow for. The next one is bulk purchase pricing, and this is for the convenience of groups purchasing a large quantity of their products in bulk, and it's usually for a specific period of time. And fares are fully and partially subsidized. So for example, the summer concert series, sometimes we have companies that want to include the cost of transit. And so if you purchase a ticket, you automatically get to ride transit. The procedures for pricing and administering these purchases would be documented and guided by an SOP. And the last would be pass programs, and this is for the convenience of groups wanting to purchase annual passes. So it's very common in the transit industry to implement programs for employers, educational institutions, or other populations. And we would have 4 main categories that the programs would fall into. They would be standard programs for small and medium-sized institutions, custom programs for larger larger institutions entering into high revenue volume contracts, educational programs for schools that are not requiring out-of-pocket costs for their students, and low-income programs for human service agencies that are fully subsidizing the transit fare for their clients. And these are the 4 main categories that we're working within right now.
On a core, would something like a ticket is fair, similar to what university does with their football games?
So that would be a bulk purchase price. We do have a date specific. Those usually cover specific dates of the football game, whereas the pass programs, those are for annual passes and repeated daily usage.
Okay.
So the reason for the pass programs then is to create and strengthen long-term relationships with entities that desire to support transit, and also to incentivize these entities to subsidize transit, and several of them do subsidize either fully or partially, and then to meet the needs of certain market segments and groups. And then also same with bulk purchase pricing, the procedures for pricing and administering these pass programs would also be documented and guided by an SOP. So those are the 3 areas that cover special pricing in the policy. Do you have any additional questions or feedback for me on these?
Questions? Looks like we're good.
Okay, so the last section of the policy I'd like to go over with you is fair administration, including collection, payment, media, and validation and enforcement. Fair collection and payment first, we would perform a cost-benefit analysis prior to the purchase of collection equipment, and like it was mentioned earlier today, we are looking and analyzing that at this time, but a cost-benefit analysis will help us understand the impacts of costs and how they relate to our fair collection. We would also have fare payment that would minimize driver and operator role in handling fares. We consider this an important aspect of fare collection. We also leverage technology to simplify validation as much as possible. And then giving all rider groups access to a fare payment option. Certain rider groups have limited payment options, so these rider groups could be a tourist, it could be maybe an occasional rider or a low-income individual, and we certainly want every rider group to have access to a fare payment option. However, we also need to be more strategic and deliberate about what those options include, and we should ensure that the costs associated with making payment options available fits within our targets and our long-term goals. UTA wants to provide easy access to fare products by providing multiple ways that we can purchase a fare, but as you have seen over my presentations the past years, it's become complex and very difficult to manage, and this complexity in part stems from 74 different combinations of mode, point of sale, fare product, media, and discount amount, and when you have those combinations, it contributes to this complex fare system. We also have point of sale locations that when you combine that with our media and our fare products, we have almost 150 of those combinations. So we're getting to the point where the amount of revenue that's being brought in for some of these location and product combinations does not justify the administrative cost at this point. But again, our goal just being to simplify options available while continuing to educate our riders on ways that they can pay for their fare in our system.
Just the policy itself doesn't determine the fair process, does it? I mean.
So no, the fair policy itself will provide the concepts necessary to go out and actually implement changes, but the policy does not dictate the changes. But
Is there a hope to how many of those 72 become, like, what was the number, 5?
Well, we can't get down to 5, but yes, we do want to shrink all of these combinations. Yes.
Okay.
I just want.
Okay.
Okay, maybe not 5. I just wanted to ask you, so, because you mentioned the fact that there is some level of cost associated with some of these lesser used fee structures that we have in existence right now. Would we make sure that an analysis is done on that final, whatever that number might be, so that we understand the scope of how that's going to be valuable, I guess, is my question.
Yeah, absolutely. And some of this is just shifting around, not necessarily a loss in fare revenue as much as just, again, replacing options and improving the options we offer now. Well, let's talk about fare media if you don't have any other questions on fare collection and payment. So the draft policy does have an section dedicated to fare media. So this is the image that I showed you during my very first presentation. And it's updated each month for our operators and inspectors. The poster comprises images here of fare media options that our operators and inspectors need to be aware of, and they need to be able to recognize these when they validate a fare. So you can see the list here, a transfer slip, which is what you receive when you pay cash on a bus, paper ticket, token, sticker, paper pass, mobile phone, and an electronic card. We have opportunities definitely to simplify this poster by looking for better ways that we can make use of our electronic fare collection system, and that's been in use now for over 10 years. So the policy does establish criteria for which the agency should base our decisions on what fare media to make available to riders, and you can see some of these. The fare media, it's easy to validate, it expedites boarding and doesn't slow it, there's a minimal administrative burden, it leverages technology, we have the ability to track inventory, minimize fraud, and the fare media is cost effective. The policy recognizes electronic fare media as our preferred fare media, but knowing this is not always ideal, there are times when other fare media makes sense. For example, high volume events or tickets provided by the event sponsor, like is the case for the U of U football games. And I'll move towards our last section, and that is validation and enforcement. If we look at the fare cycle then from beginning to end, we have shown you a fare system where we make fare products available for purchase. including pricing and receiving payment, issuing media to the rider, and the last step in this process is to validate and enforce the fare. And this work is done by our officers and our operators on a daily basis. They're a crucial line of communication to our riders. The policy does require operators to validate fare payment prior to letting the customer ride, and this can be done either visually by inspecting a paper pass or a mobile phone, receiving cash into the fare box, or having the customer tap an electronic reader. The policy requires operators to refer customers with payment issues to customer service because there are many times when customers don't have a fare or they might get a red light, but customer service can help educate our riders on the various types of fare payment options available to them. This policy does not give detailed information about how each individual situation is handled because there are so many things that our operators have to experience every day. But this is the role where an SOP would come in to provide more detailed direction. UTA operates tracks and front runner barrier free, meaning riders don't pass through a gate or turnstile to verify fare payment. They're required to have proof of payment before they even board. So we have transit police officers and fare enforcement agencies that will perform regular validation inspections. And last, in addition to regular validation inspections, transit police officers and fare enforcement agents will enforce the UTA ordinances and regulations that govern the proof of fare payment. Any questions on validation and enforcement? So before I conclude our discussion today, I want to look at the next steps with you, and we can look at this. I've broken it down into 3 phases. We are in the first phase now, which includes the discussion today. If we are all in agreement with the draft fare policy, then I will develop a summary of fare changes that I recommend the agency make this year that will simplify fares. And then using that summary, we'll conduct a Title VI analysis and perform public outreach. Following that, we will bring the final policy back to the board for approval and then implement the approved changes. And the summary of changes can also include the rates schedule that you talked about earlier. And the second phase, then, we will have the final policy approved and in place. So following the direction of the policy, we'll go ahead and prepare a fare change proposal, obtain approval to move forward with that proposal, also prepare a Title VI analysis and outreach, and if no changes result in that outreach and the Title VI analysis, then we will go ahead and seek approval and then implement the changes. And then, of course, phase 3, which sometimes is just ongoing, includes future projects. We also have present projects and then additional process improvements. So this concludes my presentation. Do you have anything, Carolyn, that you would like to add?
Just to add, so right now what we're looking at is developing the fare policy and having that approved and in place with a more simplified fare structure come fall. We don't know what that date is yet. We're going to be working with operations and community outreach to figure out what's a good time frame for that. Then this year continuously we'll start to look at whether we are going to have a fare adjustment or not. That goes in hand with the budget development. So we'll be taking a look at that. If there is, we'll be making a decision and coming back to the board. So that would go through another process. That would be for 2021. If we choose to make it, could be 2022. We'll be at the board at that point when we feel the fare adjustment is that we do need to make a fare adjustment. So those are the primary points that we're at right now. So right now we're really talking about putting the policy out and what the potential fare structure would be. Most likely the action that you would take would be to approve the policy, the fare policy, and then to adopt the fare structure through resolution.
And the adoption of the fare structure, that would be at the same time as the policy or sometime shortly after?
It could be the same time. If there's a lot of discussion still on the policy that we would need to come twice, and we probably would do it later, but it will be based off the fare structure. So, I mean, based on the fare policy.
Okay. Questions, Beth?
I just had a question in regards to implementation of any type of thing is change, right? And I think that can be somewhat challenging for the public. Is there a specific timeline in the year that's the best time to do it? Is it like August Change Day? Is it the equivalent of something like that? Or is there some other, I recognize there's all the outreach.
Right, that's what we're
portions,
trying to
but-
figure out. I mean, between needing a community engagement process that allows it to happen. August Change Day, if there's major changes, it could be, it can get caught up in that. That might not be the best timing. We might want to start on the first of the month. Those are all discussion points we'll have, so we'll come back with a better schedule for you.
Questions on your end, or?
This is going to be very simple, isn't it?
It will be, yes. Did I not use the word simple enough in my presentation?
I
Simple,
certainly
simple.
hope so.
We're working on it, absolutely.
Now, the media that's used, I guess as technology changes, the opportunity to incorporate new media for making payment, I'm assuming we would be flexible in that regard.
We are. The policy is flexible enough, and we've been working with IT closely to make sure that what technology changes we do anticipate coming up, we would be able to make those changes in the future.
How does this impact the discussion that we've had about smart fare boxes and other kinds of things? I'm assuming all of this gets thrown into the mix and complicates things.
Right. I mean, I think I do, and we've had this, Bob understands the conversations as well, is that what we do need to do is have some sense of what we're going to be wanting. So and I'll bring up the tokens. If we're not going to use tokens, we don't need to use them on the fare boxes. We might need to accommodate them for a little while, but we may not need to. So those are things that we need to look at. The electronic portion is typically a matter of programming it and reading, and so how that gets involved, those will all be things that will be taking a look at in the study. But they are going to work hand in hand, sort of where we're going to go with our electronic media that will actually interplay with what's going to go on with what we want to do for the fare boxes.
So the conversations we have about fare boxes should take into account some of this payment process, and the payment process should also take into account some of the fare box. So they need to be joined together pretty much.
Correct.
Okay.
And what we've talked about is thinking ahead 7-10 years where you think things are going to be heading. We want to be flexible enough with the policy and with where we're heading on fare collection to try to think ahead 7 to 10 years, information we want, where we think the technology's going.
I don't sense any opposition at this juncture, and it seems like we ought to continue down the pathway that we've talked, unless I'm reading my colleagues wrong. Go ahead.
No opposition, just opposition to 5.
I
very
thought he was
simple.
raising his hand.
I know, I thought that too, but no, I knew what he meant.
So I will say that right now we'll hopefully come back to you roughly in the April timeframe.
Okay.
Once we get the Title VI done, and then we do need some time to actually be able to implement a change in the fare structure. Right now, a fare structure would most likely use the base fare of the $2.50. I don't see that changing at all, but how that gets implemented, we'll need to come back to you.
At least changing as far as the initial adoption goes, right? I mean,
correct.
Right.
At some point in the future, we may choose.
We would like to have it in place before next ski season.
Yeah.
That's key, if possible, for near the beginning of the school year as well.
Yeah. So, okay, well, we'll look to somewhere mid-spring anyway,
And just to say, when we're looking at the reduced fares, we do have different rates right now for seniors, youth, sort of disabled, and putting those all on the same discount. So it would be a reduced fare and a regular fare.
Okay. Great. Well,
And then that ties in with the low fare that we've approved as pilot for.
Well, the low-income fare program is different. So some of those people, seniors, disabled, and youth could be in that program as well. I think the direction from the board there was a 65% discount on the low-income program.
75%.
Or 75% rather,
Correct.
I'm sorry, 75% on
Right.
the low income. That will be as part of the pilot program.
Okay.
But the regular fare, if someone was paying, would be a 50% discount, is what we're assuming right now.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thanks,
All
Monica.
for your time
Thanks
today.
for, I know a lot of work by a lot of people there, so thank you. Would make note of our next meeting, which will be February the 26th, and then that brings us to a closed session, which is a strategy session to discuss collective bargaining. And I would entertain them, and we'll convene in the engineer's cabin conference room.
I move that we go to closed session.
Second.
I have a motion and a second to go to closed session. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes, and then at the conclusion of that, we'll return here for adjournment. Okay, we've just returned from our closed session, and that brings us to the opportunity of adjournment.
So move.
I would love to second an opportunity to adjourn.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We stand adjourned. Thank you.